All right, we are in the 10th chapter of Ezekiel. Moving right along. I told you when we started it'd be about a year process to go through the book, but I think it's more than worth it. So often we get caught up in reading the better known, more often taught prophecies, and we neglect certain ones. And I believe this is one that gets neglected far too often. So we're going to jump right into the text. Remember that there is an interaction going on between the prophet and what he refers to as the presence of Yehovah, which we have established previously is Mashiach in a precarnate form. It says, I looked, and on the expanse over the heads of the cherubim, there was something like a sapphire stone, an appearance resembling a throne could be seen over them. We are looking at the throne in the heavenlies that is represented by the so-called mercy seat on the Ark of the Covenant. The cherubim, the cherubims, as most people say, the cherubim are in position around it and below it, paying homage but also guarding. Remember that Hasatan is referred to elsewhere in Scripture as the cherub who covereth. Okay? He stood so close to the throne of Yehovah that he was actually imbued with the Kodesh light, the light of the holiness of Yehovah. So that when Shaul says in the Berhadesh, Rav Shaul says that he masquerades as an angel of light, that's how he does that, because he was an angel of light before his fall. That is what we are seeing, but we're not seeing the physical representation. We're seeing what it represents, or the prophet is seeing that, and he's describing it to us now. It says he spoke. He here means the presence of Yehovah, the Mashiach. He spoke to the man clothed in linen. Remember last week there were 6 men and a 7th, and the 6 were sent out to make war on the city. But the one was sent out to place a mark of redemption upon those whose hearts were anguished by the abominations that they saw. Their hearts were broken and torn. They had a broken spirit and a contrite heart over the fact that the people of Yisrael were not adhering to Torah. He was the only one who returned. And what that tells me, the more I study on it, is he was the only one who returned in the previous chapter. And I believe it is because it took him far less time to mark the faithful than it took the others to strike down the unfaithful. Why? Because the faithful were a small remnant, just as we see today, and the unfaithful were the mass majority, just as we see today. He spoke to the man clothed in linen and said, step inside the wheelwork under the cherubim, and fill your hands with glowing coals from among the cherubim, and scatter them over the city. And he went in as I looked on. Now the cherubim were standing on the south side of the house when the man entered, and the cloud filled the inner court. You remember, in previous weeks we talked about the significance of the north side of the temple. Now we're looking at the south side of the temple. It's the far end of the temple from the Holy of Holies, or from the entrance to it. But now we are going up into a place where there's an offering being made. Okay? That in the temple is the only reason there would be fiery hot coals, as if a fire has been burned on the altar for the purpose of lifting up an offering. But when the presence of Yehovah moved from the cherubim to the platform of the house was filled with the cloud, and the court was filled with the radiance of the presence of Yehovah. The cloud moved with Mashiach. I've told you before when we study in Exodus and elsewhere in the Torah, and it talks about the cloud that went before the children of Yisrael in the day and the fire at night. And I said that what was in the cloud was the very presence of Yehovah, the very Mashiach, his very word, guiding them, guiding our ancestors through the wilderness, telling them where to set up the tabernacle, eventually telling them where to build their capital and their temple. I should say our capital and our temple. And I say that I've told you before that there are many, many places that point in Scripture to this being the very presence of Yehovah, the very Mashiach in pre-incarnate form. This is only one of them. That wherever he goes, when he descends from above the cherubim, so does the cloud. And not only does it descend, it fills the entire temple. Just as was the situation when Solomon dedicated the earthly temple, the priests were not capable of functioning in the temple for a period of time because the presence of Yehovah in the form of a cloud came down and filled the temple. The sound of the cherubim's wings could be heard as far as the outer court, like the voice of El Shaddai when he speaks. The sound of their wings. You know, we see this depicted in cartoons and in movies and in paintings, and it's like it's just this statue, and that's what it was on the Ark of the Covenant, on the mercy seat. But we are seeing, or he is seeing and depicting for us in his explanation, these were living beings. They were moving about. They were doing the bidding of the Ruach HaKodesh. Their wings were flapping to cause them to move. And so much as when they moved out of the way for Mashiach to descend, the sound of that movement could be heard in the outer courts of the temple. It says it was like the voice of El Shaddai when he speaks. El Shaddai is one of my favorite names for our Creator. El obviously refers to the mighty, strength. Mighty shepherd, literally, if you look at the Paleo-Hebrew. Shad is the root that is a picture of a mother's bosom. And the Shaddai is the action of bringing a child to the mother's bosom, both to protect and to nurture. And so it says that he is the mighty shepherd who protects and nurtures us by drawing us close to him. You know, it's interesting. We read in the Brit Hadash about Lazarus being at Abraham's bosom. And people read that in the English and it's, oh, Abraham gathered him to him and held him. Abraham has a lot of sons. Eventually he's going to run out of room. That's not what he's talking about. It's talking about having the experience that Abraham had being drawn to the bosom of El Shaddai. It's saying that that is the experience that Lazarus had when he was in the grave. You could say then that he was held to the same bosom as Abraham, protected in the same manner. So when the mighty shepherd of Israel, who draws us to him to preserve, to protect, to nurture, when he speaks, his voice, the magnitude of it, the power of it, the sheer earth-rocking nature of it, the sound of these wings were like unto that. When he commanded the man dressed in linen, take fire from among the cherubim within the wheelwork, he went in and stood beside the wheel. And a cherub stretched out his hand among the cherubim to the fire that was among the cherubim. He took some and put it into the hands of him who was clothed in linen, who took it and went out. You know, I've seen this depicted, and they always get it wrong. It's always, he walks up in between the cherubim, and he takes a handful and he walks out. I believe if he had done that, he would have been struck dead. Because where he was going, would have gone to get those coals, was someplace so sacred. And we're not talking about when Moshe was told, take off your sandals because the ground you stand on is holy ground. This was too holy to be called ground. And this angel, in a man's form, walks up there and waits patiently to be handed by someone closer to Elohim a portion of what Elohim has. Now, I think there's a lesson for all of us there in life. Sometimes we believe that Elohim has promised us something. Yehovah speaks into our lives, into our hearts and into our minds, and says, this is what I have for you. And we try to charge up and take it instead of waiting for someone holier than us to hand it to us. And by that, I don't mean waiting for your rabbi or your shamash to hand it to you. I'm talking about waiting for someone from beyond the veil to hand it to us, the portion that he has for us, because in our fleshly greed, we would take so much more than we can handle. Or in our fleshly fear, we would run away from it. He tells us to be still and know that he is Elohim. I see here that even this man who was not a man, who was an angel, even he walked up and held out his hand and waited to be given what Yehovah had told him to take. The cherubim appeared to have the form of a man's hand under their wings. I could see that there were 4 wheels beside the cherubim, 1 wheel beside each of the cherubim. As for the appearance of the wheels, they gleamed like the beryl stone. In appearance, the 4 had the same form, as if there were 2 wheels cutting through each other. And when they moved, each could move in the direction of any of its 4 quarters. They did not veer as they moved. The cherubim moved in the direction in which one of the heads faced, without turning as they moved. Their entire bodies, backs, hands, and wings, and the wheels of the 4 of them were covered all over with eyes. We've heard all of this before in the earlier chapters. This is all the same sort of thing that he had seen in his vision that began his prophecy years before. And he's seeing the same sort of thing, but now he's having a clearer understanding of what's going on. It was these wheels that I had heard called the wheelwork. Each one had 4 faces. Talking about the cherubim. Pay attention here, this is important. One was a cherub's face. The second, a human face. The third, a lion's face. And the fourth, an eagle's face. What is a cherub? Most Jewish scholars believe that this was the face of a calf. Not all agree with that, but the largest numbers seem to say this is the face of a bull calf. And we know that Hasatan desires to be worshipped. We know that Hasatan is a cherub, a cherub. We know that he glows and shines as though he's still standing in the presence of Yehovah, because sometimes he is. And isn't it interesting? Isn't it interesting that down through history, some of the most prominent forms of satanic worship have been the worship of the cow or the bull god, the worship of the emperor, a human being, or the worship of Messiah instead of his father. People go after Mashiach all the time and say, there are places there, they call themselves Jesus-only churches. Boy, have they missed the boat. Because he said, don't worship me, worship my Father, worship the one who sent me. There are people worshiping Shaul. They call him Paul, but they worship Shaul. But Shaul said, or Paul said, this whole denomination worships Cephas and all of his so-called supposed descendants in the line. Or they worship the so-called prophet that started them. Muhammad said, Joseph Smith said, the third, a lion's face. I didn't realize this until I studied some of the teachings of Richard Reeves, and then got pointed back to the teachings of Ron Wyatt. On every continent that is inhabited, there has at some point been a major culture that worshipped a large calf. Whether it was the Egyptians or the Aztecs. Everyone's heard of Tecumseh, great war leader of, was it the Seneca? His brother, the prophet. Tecumseh's name literally means panther in the sky. And because he was such a great war leader, his brother led the people to follow him and basically worship him. And the fourth, an eagle's face. Put aside the flag for a moment, which represents the leadership of a country. Comes down from emperor worship. Ours does. Ours comes from Great Britain, which comes from Rome. I say ours is the United States. What's the other great symbol of our country? The eagle. And how many people get caught up in court cases every year because they want an eagle feather because it's part of their religion? People who call themselves quote-unquote Christians, but they have Native American roots, and they say, oh, but I want to be holy like my ancestors, and they have eagle feathers. And eagles are protected because the government kind of worships them too. Birds of prey have been worshipped as a form of satanic worship down through history. The cherubim ascended. Those were the creatures that I had seen by the Hebar Canal. Whenever the cherubim went, the wheels went beside them. And when the cherubim lifted their wings to ascend from the earth, the wheels did not roll away from their side. When those stood still, those stood still. And when those ascended, these ascended with them. For the spirit, the ruach of the creature was in them. Then the presence of Yehovah left the platform of the house and stopped above the cherubim. And I saw the cherubim lift their wings and rise from the earth, and the wheels beside them as they departed, and they stopped at the entrance of the eastern gate of the house of Yehovah. So now we've dealt with the north side, the south side, the east side. Remember the east side, where the 25 men had their backs to the east side of the temple and were worshiping the sun? That's back where we are now. With the presence of the Elohim of Yisrael above them. The cherubim ascended. Those were the creatures that I had seen by the Hebar Canal. Whenever the cherubim went, the wheels went beside them. And when the cherubim lifted their wings to ascend from the earth, the wheels did not roll away from their side. When those stood still, those stood still. And when those ascended, these ascended with them. For the spirit, the ruach of the creature was in them. Then the presence of Yehovah left the platform of the house and stopped above the cherubim. And I saw the cherubim lift their wings and rise from the earth, and the wheels beside them as they departed, and they stopped at the entrance of the eastern gate of the house of Yehovah. So now we've dealt with the north side, the south side, the east side. Remember the east side, where the 25 men had their backs to the east side of the temple and were worshiping the sun? That's back where we are now. With the presence of the Elohim of Yisrael above them. You know, all throughout Scripture, when it talks about Yehovah, his emissaries coming, they come from the east, and they recede to the east. They were the same creatures that I had seen below the Elohim of Yisrael at the Hebar Canal. You notice he doesn't say the presence of. He knew they were two different beings. He says it plainly in his text. If people would read the book of Ezekiel, Trinity and oneness both go out the window. You can't believe those things and believe Ezekiel. You can't believe Ezekiel and believe Trinity or oneness. At some point, we have to make a fine cut and say we're going to stand with the Word. The problem is, most people who call themselves believers today have never done a verse-by-verse study of the book of Ezekiel. And why? Because their religious leadership don't want them to. They don't want them digging deeper into the prophets. Why? Because then they will have to answer for the lies that they have told. So now I knew that they were cherubim. See, he didn't know that before. Before he was just awestruck. Now he's several years into his prophecy, several years into his ministry as a prophet, and he's beginning to understand better what he's seeing. Each one had 4 faces, and each had 4 wings, with the form of human hands under the wings. As for the form of their faces, they were the very faces that I had seen by the Hebar Canal. So not only are they the same type of beings, they are the same beings. They were distinct. The faces were distinct enough that he could say, yes, these are the 4 cherubim that I saw years ago. Their appearance and their features, and each could move in the direction of any of its faces. You know, there's something significant about that. 4 faces, 4 wings. They don't have to turn. They move in any direction that they're facing. Any one of them's facing. It's only been said like 4 times since we started the text. 2 of them today. Might want to be thinking about why that's important. We'll be getting into it farther down the line. Do we have a midrash on this?
I just wanted to say, I think you're definitely right about that. He was being home worship. I do think that, some, like, I mean, every problem does worship that, but I think some of what they're doing is sign the same species of
Right.
birds that have been killed off because like eagles and stuff like that. Because the species are endangered.
I get that. I'm sure there are some people. I mean, I want to see the species survive,
Right.
but there would be better ways to handle that than locking people in prison for years.
Well, yeah, I agree with that.
Okay, and so that's the kind of defensive guarding that there's something more going on there than we want to save the earth.
So,
No, it actually in this chapter it actually said that when they ascended, the wheels ascended. They were separate, but they did whatever it did, or whatever the creature did. Something like that. I'm not going to pretend to fully understand it. I hope someday to see it and say, that's how that works. I don't recall it ever giving a measurement. Do you know of a place where it tells a measurement? No? Okay. I don't recall one. I picture them as massive, but I don't know. See, but that goes back to a discussion we've had before. Things like that used to frighten me until I realized for those of us who are saved, this is a beautiful thing. You know, the only people who should be afraid of this are the people who are uncertain about where they're going. I mean, or what their eternity is going to be like. Because this represents the eyes on the wheels, represent his omniscience. He knows everything that we do. He knows our hearts. He knows our minds. He knows our actions. He knows our words. And someday we'll be judged for that. And thankfully, there's a perfect sacrifice so that I can, although I'll be judged guilty because I've been guilty, thankfully I'll also be judged as saved. And the judge will say, yes, you deserve death, but that penalty was paid. Like you go into court and the judge says, you deserve this. Boom, the gavel is dropped. Oh, but by the way, someone has volunteered to pay your fine. Has paid your bond. You don't have to go to jail.
So, sapphire goes around. And science says that almost everything is science, astrology. But blue stars are supposed to be the strongest, most hottest, whatever, youngest. Um, and there's a belief that the North Star is where the
In Hebraic cosmology, the throne that we're seeing is believed to sit directly above Polaris.
I can't imagine those creatures because very expensive. Like you don't have and how do they go? Such I mean,
Well, I think it's.
I don't.
I think part of the problem is people visualize it as like there's one facing each of the four corners here. Okay, I don't think so because it says that it talks about going to the four corners, and I think there's one facing each out each direction like that. And I think that's how they were on the mercy seat also, pointing out like if this was the mercy seat, there'd be one pointing toward you and one pointing over there, and they'd be pointing these directions. And I think I don't know. It started more and more. It makes sense in my head every time I study through through Ezekiel, it gets easier a little bit for me to picture it. But I'm not going to say that I know it all.
Yeah, that makes more sense.
Mhm. That would explain why they don't have to turn because they're already moving on an angle. Um, well, it's a wheel inside a wheel, and I don't fully understand that. But I had an engineer one time tell me that there is a way to make a wheel that goes this way and a wheel that goes this way, and it would roll this way, and then when it needed to turn, it would kind of do like a thing like that, and then it would be wheeling with the other wheel. I don't understand how that would work, but I'm told that it can, so I'm willing to. You know what? Even if it's not physically possible, well, it's Elohim. You know, he can do what he wants.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, whatever this whole thing is perfect, must be beautiful, and maybe try to scare us because it's so far out of our
Mm-hmm.
daily lives, you know what I mean? All eyes.
Yep. Anybody else have questions? No?